the Australian Curriculum version 9.0 Comprehensive Analysis. What they're teaching your children in Queensland, South Australia, Tasmania, Northern Territory, and Australian Capital Territory. If you live in Queensland, South Australia, Tasmania, the Northern Territory, or the Australian Capital Territory, and you have children in school, this podcast is for you. Because while you've been busy working, raising your family, living your life, something has happened to what your children are being taught. Not in some distant future, not in theory, right now, today, in their classrooms. It's called the Australian Curriculum version 9.0. It was rolled out starting in 2023. And if you haven't looked at it, really looked at it, you need to understand what it contains. Now, some of you might have heard about issues with Victorian curriculum. You might have thought,
Thank goodness we're not in Victoria. We just have the national curriculum.
Here's what you need to know. The Australian curriculum and Victorian curriculum share the same ideological DNA. They have the same structure, the same priorities, the same capabilities, the same framework. Victorian curriculum is actually just an adapted version of the Australian curriculum with some additional Victorian elements. The core ideology, identical. So when we talk about what's in Australian curriculum version 9.0, we're talking about what Queensland students learn in Brisbane and Cairns and Townsville, what South Australian students learn in Adelaide and Mount Gambier, what Tasmanian students learn in Hobart and Launceston, what Northern Territory students learn in Darwin and Alice Springs, what ACT students learn in Canberra. Over the next 70 to 80 minutes, we're going to walk through this curriculum systematically. We'll cover the 3 cross-curriculum priorities that must be embedded in every subject at every level. The 4 key general capabilities that shape how students think and what they value. What this actually looks like in classrooms across your states and territories. How this compares to what you probably learned when you were in school. What you can do about it as a parent. This is detailed. This is comprehensive. This is long. Because you deserve to know exactly what your children are being taught with your tax dollars in public schools across these 5 jurisdictions. Let's begin. Part 1. Understanding the structure. Before we dive into the content, you need to understand how Australian Curriculum version 9.0 is structured, because the structure itself is part of the ideology. The curriculum has what they call 3 dimensions. Dimension 1, 8 learning areas. These are your traditional subjects: English, mathematics, science, humanities and social sciences. This combines history, geography, civics and citizenship, and economics and business. Health and physical education, languages, technologies, the arts. So far, fairly straightforward. You probably learned most of these subjects when you were in school. Dimension 2, 7 general capabilities. This is where it starts getting interesting. These are supposedly skills and dispositions students need. They include literacy, numeracy, digital literacy, critical and creative thinking, personal and social capability, ethical understanding, intercultural understanding. Dimension 3, 3 cross-curriculum priorities. And here's an important issue. These are priorities that must be embedded, that's their word, embedded, across all subjects at all levels. They are 1. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander histories and cultures. 2. Asia and Australia's engagement with Asia. 3. Sustainability. Now, before anyone accuses me of being against teaching about Aboriginal history or Asian cultures or environmental issues, stop. The question isn't whether these topics should be covered. The question is, should they be mandatory in every single subject? Should they frame how every subject is taught? And should they carry specific ideological assumptions? Because that's what cross-curriculum priorities means. It's not, hey, let's make sure we cover Aboriginal history in history class. It's Aboriginal perspectives must be embedded in mathematics, science, English, physical education, arts, everything. And they must frame how students understand these subjects. And here's the crucial thing. These 3 priorities and these capabilities aren't taught as separate classes. They're woven throughout everything your children learn. They shape the content, the assessments, the discussions, the entire educational experience. This is systematic. This is comprehensive. This is, by design, inescapable. Now let's look at what's actually in them. Part 2. Cross-curriculum priority. Number 1. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander histories and cultures. Let's start with the big one, the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander histories and cultures priority. This priority is built on 3 key concepts that, according to the curriculum, students must understand. Let me read you these 3 concepts directly from the official curriculum documents. Key Concept 1, Country/Place. The curriculum states that students must learn about
the importance of country/place to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples,
and understand that
country/place is central to their identity, spirituality, and ways of knowing, being, and doing.
Now you might think this is just about teaching respect for Aboriginal connection to land, but notice the language. Ways of knowing. Not just ways they know, but presenting this as an alternative epistemology, an alternative way of knowing reality itself. The curriculum explicitly states that students must learn about
Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples' holistic view of country/place as interconnecting people, animals, plants, landforms, and waterways with spiritual and cultural significance.
Here's what this looks like in practice. In a science class, students don't just learn the scientific method for understanding ecosystems. They must also learn Aboriginal ways of knowing about ecosystems, as if these are equivalent approaches to understanding reality. In geography, students must understand landforms not just through geological science, but through Aboriginal spiritual significance. Even in mathematics, and yes, I'm serious, teachers are expected to incorporate Aboriginal perspectives on country/place into mathematical concepts. Key Concept 2, Culture. The second key concept focuses on Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultures. Note the plural, as dynamic, contemporary, and diverse. The curriculum states students must learn that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander
cultures, values, and belief systems remain strong and viable,
and that these cultures
continue to shape contemporary Australia.
Now, teaching about Aboriginal cultures, absolutely appropriate in history, Haas, even arts. But this priority requires it to be embedded everywhere. The curriculum also emphasises what it calls cultural protocols, that is, appropriate ways of engaging with Aboriginal cultural knowledge. Students are taught that certain knowledge is restricted, that permission is required to use certain stories or images, that Aboriginal cultural authority must be deferred to. Again, respecting cultural protocols in appropriate contexts makes sense. But when this becomes part of how every subject is approached, it's teaching students that different groups have different authorities over knowledge based on identity. That's not multiculturalism. That's epistemological relativism. Key Concept 3, People. The third concept focuses on Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples.
Resilience and resistance.
In response to colonisation. The curriculum explicitly states that students must learn about
the ongoing impact of colonisation and the significance of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples' resistance, agency, and activism in maintaining and developing cultures and identities.
Notice the framing. Colonisation is presented as ongoing impact, not historical event with ongoing effects, but ongoing process. And the focus is on resistance and activism. This is where Australian history shifts from.
Aboriginal people lived here. Europeans came and settled. There were conflicts and injustices we should acknowledge and learn from.
2.
Australia is defined by ongoing colonisation that Aboriginal people resist through activism.
Let me give you specific examples of how this plays out across subjects. In English, students analyse texts through the lens of Aboriginal perspectives. Literature selections must include Aboriginal authors and themes. Even classic literature is analysed for how it represents or fails to represent Aboriginal peoples. Students in Year 9 to 10 are explicitly required to
understand how Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples use language to maintain, develop, and express their cultures, identities, knowledge systems, and connections to country/place.
In mathematics, yes, really, students learn about Aboriginal counting systems, patterns in Aboriginal art, spatial concepts in Aboriginal mapping. Now, some of this can be genuinely interesting cultural content, but when it's mandatory across the entire math curriculum, it's not enrichment, it's embedding an ideological priority. In science, students must learn about
Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples' knowledge of the environment.
Alongside scientific knowledge. Now, Aboriginal peoples obviously developed sophisticated environmental knowledge over tens of thousands of years. But presenting traditional ecological knowledge as epistemologically equivalent to the scientific method is problematic. Science is science precisely because it has a methodology that transcends cultural perspective. When you make science perspective-based, you undermine what makes science scientific. In Haas, history, geography, civics, economics. This is where it's most heavy. Australian history is taught primarily through the lens of colonisation and dispossession. The emphasis is consistently on invasion, frontier wars, stolen generations, discrimination, and ongoing impacts. Should they be the primary lens through which all Australian history is understood? That's where it becomes ideological. Students in Year 5 learn about
the nature of convict or colonial presence, the resulting causes and effects on the environment, and the patterns of resistance and adaptation by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples.
Year 9 students learn about
the colonisation of Australia and experiences of non-Europeans in Australia prior to 1900, including the various restrictions placed on them and their responses.
Year 10 students examine
the struggles of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples for rights and freedoms in Australia and the significance of the Mabo decision, reconciliation, and the stolen generations.
Notice the pattern: colonisation, restrictions, struggles, resistance. This is a particular narrative framework, not neutral historical content. In health and physical education, students must understand
the significance of country/place in maintaining the health and well-being of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples.
They examine
the role of community and cultural identity in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples' health.
Even in physical education, there's requirement to include Aboriginal games and sports, to understand Aboriginal perspectives on physical activity, to frame concepts through Aboriginal cultural lens. In arts, students must learn about and create art
that reflects Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultural protocols, styles, and perspectives.
They analyse how
Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander artists use the arts to express and maintain cultural identity.
This sounds positive. Exposure to Aboriginal art forms. But when it's mandatory across all arts education from foundation onwards, and when students are assessed on their ability to demonstrate understanding of and respect for Aboriginal cultural protocols, it's teaching students that creating or discussing art involving Aboriginal themes requires cultural permission and adherence to specific protocols. What's the cumulative effect? By the time students complete Year 10 having been taught this priority embedded across every subject for 11 years, what have they learned? They've learned that Australian history is primarily a story of colonisation and dispossession. Aboriginal ways of knowing are equivalent to scientific or historical methods. Different cultural groups have authority over knowledge in their domains. Accessing or discussing Aboriginal cultural content requires permission and protocol observance. Australia's defining feature is ongoing colonisation that requires resistance and activism. Now, should students learn about Aboriginal history, culture, and ongoing challenges? Absolutely yes. Should they learn about frontier wars, stolen generations, discrimination? Not really, because this area becomes very agenda-driven very quickly. But they do. But should all of this be embedded as a priority, shaping every subject your children study for their entire school career? Should Aboriginal perspectives frame how they learn mathematics, science, English, geography, arts, physical education? That's not education, that's indoctrination. And before anyone says,
"But this is just teaching respect and cultural awareness."
No. Teaching respect for Aboriginal cultures can happen in history and Haas classes with honest, complete coverage. Embedding Aboriginal perspectives as a lens for understanding all subjects is teaching students that knowledge itself is culturally relative, that different groups have different ways of knowing reality, and that Australia is defined by colonisation. That's ideology, not education. Part 3. Cross-curriculum priority. Asia and Australia's engagement with Asia. The second cross-curriculum priority is Asia and Australia's engagement with Asia. Now this one might seem less obviously problematic. Teaching about Asia makes sense. We're in the Asian region. We have significant trade relationships. Many Australians have Asian heritage. Learning about Asian cultures, histories, languages, and contemporary issues seems perfectly reasonable. And if this priority were simply, let's make sure students learn about Asian history, cultures, and Australia's relationships with Asian nations, taught primarily in HASS, languages, maybe arts, that would be one thing. But remember, this is a cross-curriculum priority. It must be embedded across all subjects, and it comes with specific ideological framing. Let me read you the official rationale. The curriculum states that this priority
provides opportunities for students to develop an understanding of the diversity of Asian cultures, including knowledge of and respect for Asian societies, beliefs, and traditions.
It emphasises that Asia is Australia's regional context and that Australia is part of the Asian region. Now notice what's happening here. The priority isn't just learn about Asian nations. It's understand Australia as part of Asia. It's a deliberate reframing of Australian identity away from Western and toward Asian. The curriculum explicitly states students should understand
how people view and connect differently with places, including the places where they live.
And
how Australia is part of the Asian region and our histories from ancient times to the present are linked.
The two key concepts. This priority is organised around two organising ideas.
1. Australians of Asian heritage have contributed to Australian society.
Fair enough. Many Australians have Asian heritage and have made significant contributions. This is worth teaching, particularly in history. But when this becomes a lens applied across all subjects, what happens? In English, literature selections must include Asian Australian authors. In arts, students must engage with Asian and Asian Australian artistic traditions. Even in science and mathematics, there's push to highlight Asian and Asian Australian scientists and mathematicians.
2. Asia is central to Australia's economic and strategic interests.
This is geopolitical framing presented as educational priority. Students from foundation onwards are taught that Asia is central to Australia's interests, that Australia's future is tied to Asia, that understanding Asia is essential to understanding Australia. In geography, students must understand
Australia's connections with countries in Asia and the effects of these connections on peoples and places.
In economics and business, students examine Australia's trade relationships with Asia, labour connections, investment flows. Again, teaching about trade relationships with Asian nations in an economics class, perfectly appropriate. But making Asia is central to Australia's interests, a priority embedded across all subjects. That's presenting a particular geopolitical framework as educational imperative. How this plays out across subjects. In English, students read and analyse Asian and Asian Australian literature. They examine
perspectives and values, including cultural perspectives, expressed in texts from and about the Asian region.
Year 9 students specifically analyse
how ideas, attitudes and language features from texts from and about the Asian region may reflect their cultural contexts.
In mathematics and science, students learn about mathematical and scientific developments in Asian cultures. Now, Asian cultures have made enormous contributions to mathematics and science. Arabic numerals, actually Indian, Chinese astronomy, Japanese advances in technology. Learning about these? Great. But when this becomes a requirement embedded across the curriculum, it shifts from let's learn about diverse contributions to knowledge to let's frame mathematics and science through cultural perspectives. In HASS, this is where the priority is most extensive. Students learn about Asian history, geography, civics, and economies throughout their schooling. Foundation students learn about
how people in their local community and familiar places connect with places in Asia.
By Year 6, students are learning about
the diverse cultures and peoples of Asia, including the influences of Indianization, Islamization, or Confucianism.
Year 8 students examine
the perspectives and experiences of people living under imperialism and colonialism, including in the Asian region.
Year 10 students study
the nature and significance of Australia's economic connections with Asia and how these connections are shaped by changes in the economies in the Asia region.
In languages, students who study Asian languages obviously learn about Asian cultures, but the priority extends beyond language classes. Even students not studying Asian languages must encounter Asian cultural content across their subjects. In arts, students must engage with Asian artistic traditions, understand Asian aesthetics, analyse Asian art forms, and create artworks influenced by or responding to Asian cultures. In health and physical education, students learn about Asian approaches to health and well-being, Asian physical activities and sports, Asian cultural attitudes toward body and health. What's the purpose? So what's the cumulative effect of embedding Asia and Australia's engagement with Asia across all subjects for 11 years? Students learn that Australia is part of Asia, not part of the West. Australian identity should be understood through Asian connection rather than Western heritage. Asia is central to Australia's future, economically, strategically, culturally. Asian cultural perspectives should frame how students understand diverse subjects. Now, should students learn about Asian history, cultures, and Australia's relationships with Asian nations? Absolutely. Should they learn Asian languages if they choose? Fantastic. But should this be a priority shaping how they learn English, literature, mathematics, science, arts, health, geography, economics, everything? Here's the ideological project. Australia has historically identified as part of the West. British heritage, Westminster system, European cultural traditions, English language, Western philosophical and legal traditions. That's not the only element of Australian identity, but it's been central. This priority is systematically reorienting Australian identity toward Asia and away from the West. It's saying, you're not really Western, you're Asian. Or, at the very least, your Western heritage should be decentered in favour of Asian connections. Is that a legitimate educational priority that should be embedded across every subject students learn? Or is that a geopolitical and cultural reorientation being accomplished through curriculum? Part 4. Cross-curriculum. Priority number 3. Sustainability. Now we come to the third cross-curriculum priority, sustainability. And this is the big one in terms of sheer scope and ideological intensity. Let's hear the official rationale.
The sustainability priority is concerned with the ongoing capacity of Earth to maintain all life. Ecological, social, and economic systems are interconnected. Sustainability addresses the ongoing capacity of Earth to maintain all life.
It continues.
Education for sustainability develops the knowledge, skills, values, and worldviews students need to take action to enable more sustainable patterns of living.
Notice that phrase, values and worldviews. This isn't just teaching environmental science, it's explicitly about shaping what students value and how they view the world. The curriculum states that sustainability
aims to encourage reflection on environmental, social, cultural, and economic considerations and issues, and empower them as change agents to envisage alternative futures and to take action for more sustainable patterns of living.
Notice these specific terms. Change agents. Envisage alternative futures. Take action. This is activism, not education. The 3 key concepts. The sustainability priority is organised around 3 organising ideas, pyramids, systems. The curriculum states students must understand
the interdependence of environmental, social, cultural, and economic systems and their impact on the sustainability of ecosystems and human societies.
This sounds technical, understanding interconnected systems. But notice what it does. It frames environmental issues as fundamentally connected to social, cultural, and economic systems. That means discussing environmental issues inevitably means discussing economics, society, and culture as parts of the problem. Students learn that
human well-being and environmental sustainability require a range of value systems and perspectives to inform and support decision-making.
Notice that value systems is plural, meaning there's no single correct approach to environmental issues. Western industrial capitalism, that's just one value system. Indigenous traditional practices, another value system. Anti-capitalist degrowth, Another value system. All equal, all valid perspectives. Except they're not presented as equal because the curriculum has a clear preferred direction. The second key concept is worldviews. The curriculum explicitly states students must
explore and appreciate different worldviews, particularly Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander worldviews that influence decisions about sustainability.
Students must understand
How Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people's worldviews of the environment encompass interconnectedness and relationships.
Notice this frames Aboriginal worldviews as superior for understanding environmental issues. It's not.
Let's learn about diverse perspectives, including Aboriginal perspectives.
Rather, it's
Aboriginal worldviews offer important insights that Western approaches lack.
the curriculum states students should understand
Different worldviews, including anthropocentric and ecocentric worldviews.
anthropocentric means human-centered. Humans matter more than other species. Nature exists partly for human benefit and use. This is, roughly, the traditional Western view and the view underlying modern economic development. Ecocentric means ecology-centered. The ecosystem as a whole matters. Humans aren't necessarily more important than other species. Nature has intrinsic value beyond human use. This is the environmental activist position. By framing these as equal worldviews to choose between, the curriculum presents the question, should humans use natural resources for development and prosperity? As a matter of perspective, not as a question with answers that can be evaluated based on evidence and outcomes. And guess which worldview the curriculum materials consistently favour? The third key concept is futures. The third organising idea is about futures, and specifically, the future shaped by environmental crisis. Students must learn to
critique their own and others' interpretations of the meaning of sustainability, and generate alternative visions for more sustainable futures.
They must learn to
Imagine and design possible, probable, and preferable futures for more sustainable patterns of living.
This is where it gets explicitly activist. Students aren't learning objective environmental science. They're being trained to critique current systems, imagine alternative futures, and design new ways of living. The curriculum states students should
Develop and implement sustainability action plans that aim to initiate and lead change.
Notice that language again. Initiate and lead change. These are school students. They're learning to be activists. How sustainability appears across subjects. This priority is embedded with extraordinary comprehensiveness. Let me walk through how it appears. In science, you'd think science class would be where environmental issues are taught most objectively. Here's the data on climate change. Here's the evidence for environmental problems. Here's the scientific consensus and the debates. But because sustainability is a cross-curriculum priority, science becomes platform for activism. Foundation students learn about
How people use science knowledge to make decisions about sustainable use of resources.
By Year 3, students are learning about
How sustainable practices can impact available resources now and into the future.
Year 5, students examine
How human activity causes reversible and irreversible environmental effects.
Year 7, students investigate
Sustainable ways to manage resources and waste, including how biological and geological processes are used to produce food, clothing, and shelter.
Year 9, students explore
How science knowledge contributes to developing practices in agriculture, industry, and other human activity that are sustainable.
Notice the consistent framing. Humans cause environmental damage. We need sustainable practices. Science should serve sustainability. Is natural climate change real? Yes. Are there environmental challenges we need to address? Absolutely. But science class should be teaching the scientific method, teaching students how to evaluate evidence, teaching them the actual data and scientific debates, not training them to be environmental activists. In mathematics, even mathematics gets sustainability embedded. Students use mathematics to
Investigate, model, and communicate about sustainability issues in their local community and beyond.
They analyse data about
Resource use, waste production, energy consumption, and model sustainable outcomes.
Year 7 students use statistics to examine
Population data, water usage, or carbon emissions.
Year 9 students apply their understanding of rates and measurement to.
Analyse issues related to sustainability.
This is using mathematics as tool for environmental activism. Students aren't learning mathematics for its own sake or for general application. They're learning it to analyse sustainability issues. In English, students read and analyse texts about environmental issues and sustainability throughout their English education. They examine
How language is used to persuade people to take action on sustainability issues.
They analyse
Perspectives and values in texts that explore sustainability.
Year 9 students specifically study
Texts that explore the interconnectedness of people and place and sustainability.
and analyse
How social, cultural and environmental worldviews are constructed in texts.
Literature selections increasingly focus on environmental themes, cli-fi, climate fiction, and narratives about environmental destruction and activism. In HASS, this is where sustainability priority is most pervasive. Geography is almost entirely organised around sustainability themes, from Year 7 onwards. Year 7.
The interconnection between people, places and environments, and how places are managed and changed to make them sustainable.
Year 8.
Environmental change, human activity and management strategies to address challenges to sustainability.
Year 9.
Environmental, economic and technological factors affecting interconnection between places and human well-being, and strategies to improve global sustainability.
Year 10.
Environmental and human processes affecting sustainability in different places and strategies to address these challenges.
Notice the pattern. Every year, sustainability is the framework through which geography is taught. Economics and business classes focus on sustainable business practices, circular economy, ethical consumption, corporate social responsibility, all from perspective that current economic systems are unsustainable. In health and physical education, students learn about
Sustainable health practices,
and
environmental factors affecting health and well-being,
they explore
how environmental sustainability affects health,
and examine
connections between personal lifestyle choices and environmental impact.
Even physical education connects to sustainability through examination of sustainable sports practices and
Environmental impacts of recreation.
in technologies, design and technologies is explicitly framed around sustainability. Students must
Critique needs or opportunities for sustainable designs or technologies.
and
Generate ideas for sustainable solutions.
they evaluate
Technologies in terms of sustainability and impacts on people, places and environments.
digital technologies examines
Sustainability of digital systems.
and
Environmental impacts of technology.
in the arts, students create artworks.
That explore and communicate about sustainability issues.
They analyse.
How artists use the arts to communicate about environmental and social issues.
They examine.
Representations of the environment and sustainability in artworks.
The cumulative message. So what's the message students receive about sustainability after 11 years of this being embedded across every subject? Well, there are a few. 1. Environmental crisis is established fact requiring urgent action. Not.
Climate change is happening, and here's the scientific evidence and ongoing debates.
But.
Crisis is certain. Time is running out. We must act now.
2. Current economic and social systems are fundamentally unsustainable. Capitalism, industrial development, consumption patterns, Western lifestyles, all presented as inherently problematic and requiring transformation. 3. Alternative worldviews, particularly non-Western, especially Aboriginal, offer better approaches. Western anthropocentric views are the problem. Aboriginal ecocentric worldviews are the solution. This is presented as fact, not as perspective. 4. Students should be activists working for change. Students are explicitly trained to critique current systems, imagine alternatives, design solutions, and lead change. They're being trained as activists, not educated citizens. 5. Individual actions matter, but systemic change is required. Students learn both personal, sustainable choices, reduce, reuse, recycle, and need for system transformation, challenging capitalism, changing economic structures, transforming society. The ideological core. Here's what sustainability priority is really about. It's teaching students that Western industrial civilization is destroying the planet, that current economic systems are unsustainable, that massive social and economic transformation is required, and that they should be activists pushing for this transformation. This is comprehensive ideological programming using environmental concern as the vehicle. Should students learn about environmental challenges? Absolutely. Should they learn the science of natural climate change? Yes. Should they understand environmental impacts of human activity? Of course. Should they be taught practical approaches to resource management and conservation? Definitely. But should they be systematically trained as environmental activists who view Western civilization as fundamentally destructive and who are committed to transforming economic and social systems? That's not education. That's indoctrination. And it's embedded in every subject they study for 11 years. The Australian Curriculum Version 9.0. Comprehensive Analysis. Section 2. General Capabilities. Parent Implications and Closing. Part 5. General Capability. Number 1. Critical and Creative Thinking. Now we move from the cross-curriculum priorities to the general capabilities. And this is where we see how the curriculum shapes not just what students learn, but how they think. The first capability is critical and creative thinking. Now you might be thinking, critical thinking? That sounds good. We want students who can think critically. Absolutely. But the question is, what does the Australian curriculum mean by critical thinking? Because that phrase has been captured by progressive education, and it doesn't mean what most parents think it means. What critical thinking used to mean. Traditional critical thinking meant logic, reasoning, evaluating arguments, identifying fallacies, distinguishing fact from opinion, assessing evidence, drawing valid conclusions. It was about tools for clear thinking that apply regardless of subject matter or political perspective. You could use critical thinking to evaluate any argument, conservative or progressive, religious or secular, economic or social. The tools were neutral. The process was objective. What critical thinking means in the Australian curriculum. The Australian curriculum defines critical thinking as students
Analysing and assessing possibilities against criteria for judgment.
and
Construct and evaluate arguments and use information, evidence and logic to draw reasoned conclusions.
that sounds reasonable until you realise the curriculum provides the criteria for judgment. The curriculum decides what counts as valid evidence. The curriculum determines which conclusions are reasonable. Let me give you specific examples of how this plays out. The curriculum states that critical thinking involves
Dispositions such as inquisitiveness, reasonableness, intellectual flexibility, open and fair-mindedness.
Again, sounds great. But what does open-mindedness mean in practice? Does it mean being open to conservative and progressive perspectives equally? Or does it mean being open to diverse perspectives as defined by the curriculum, which consistently means perspectives that challenge dominant narratives, traditional or Western views? The 4 elements. Critical and creative thinking is organised around 4 elements. 1. Inquiring. Students learn to
Pose questions to clarify and expand knowledge, beliefs, practices and viewpoints.
notice. Not just expand knowledge, but expand beliefs, practices and viewpoints. The assumption is that existing beliefs and viewpoints need expansion, meaning they're insufficient or wrong. Students must
Identify, frame and clarify problems and analyse and evaluate information, evidence and possibilities for decision making.
Who decides what constitutes a problem? Climate change is presented as problem requiring urgent action, not as a complex issue with trade-offs. Immigration policy isn't presented as a question with reasonable people disagreeing, but as an issue where inclusive position is obviously correct. The second element is generating. This is the creative thinking component students learn to
Draw on their imagination, consider alternatives and new possibilities, and see existing situations in a new way.
The curriculum states students should
draw on prior knowledge and make new connections to generate and develop ideas and envision possibilities.
This sounds like brainstorming. But notice what happens in practice. Students are prompted to imagine alternatives to current systems, to envision different futures, to question existing structures, and the alternatives they generate are guided by the curriculum's ideological frameworks. When students imagine alternatives to current economic systems, they're not equally exploring capitalism, socialism, and mixed economies. They're guided toward sustainable and equitable alternatives to consumerism and exploitation. The third element is analysing. Students learn to
Examine possibilities and make distinctions, and see or make patterns and connections.
They must.
Evaluate the strengths and weaknesses of ideas or positions.
But here's the key question. Using what standards? When students evaluate positions, are they using neutral logical standards? Or are they using the curriculum's implicit standards, where positions challenging dominant narratives are stronger, where inclusive perspectives are preferable, where sustainable approaches are obviously better? The curriculum states students should
Understand how individual, collective, cultural, and institutional biases and perspectives can influence the framing of problems and solutions.
Notice, students are taught to look for biases, but the curriculum itself has biases that students aren't taught to identify. They learn to spot institutional biases in traditional systems, but not in the progressive frameworks they're being taught. Part 6. General capability number 2. Ethical understanding. The second capability is ethical understanding, and this is where the curriculum explicitly moves into shaping students' values and moral frameworks. Let's hear the official rationale.
Ethical understanding involves students learning about ethics as a branch of philosophy where questions are raised about how we should act, what values are important, and what principles should guide our choices.
Now, teaching ethics makes sense. Students should understand ethical reasoning, major ethical theories, how different cultures approach moral questions. But notice what the curriculum is doing. Not just teaching about ethics, but shaping how students make ethical choices and what values they should hold. The rationale continues.
Ethical understanding enables students to build capacity to decide which actions are more ethically acceptable than others, to identify strategies for reconciling values that are in tension, and to navigate various ethical issues.
Who decides which actions are more ethically acceptable? What values does the curriculum prioritize? What ethical issues does it emphasize? The 4 elements. Ethical understanding is organized around 4 elements. 1. Understanding concepts. Students learn ethical concepts like
Fairness, justice, rights and responsibilities, care, compassion, empathy, respect for persons, equality and difference, community, sustainability, courage and resilience.
Now look at that list carefully. These sound like universal values. But notice what's included and what's not. Included: equality, sustainability, difference, community. Not included: individual liberty, personal responsibility. There's responsibilities, but in collective sense. Excellence, virtue, duty. The emphasis is on collective, egalitarian, environmental values. Traditional emphasis on individual virtue, achievement, duty to family and nation. Absent: the second element, exploring issues. Students learn to
Reflect on ethical dimensions of issues by considering how these issues affect others, whether relevant ethical principles are being upheld, and the multiple perspectives on what is valuable, important, or meaningful.
Students examine
Issues that involve consideration of ethical dilemmas in personal, school, local, national, regional, and global contexts.
what ethical dilemmas does the curriculum emphasize? Environmental ethics: should we prioritize economic development or environmental protection? Social justice: how should society address inequality? Cultural respect: how should we engage with different cultures? Rights: what rights should different groups have? These are framed as the key ethical issues students should grapple with. Notice what's largely absent. Sexual ethics: ethics of family structure, ethics of national sovereignty and immigration, ethics of personal responsibility versus social support, religious perspectives on ethics. The curriculum's ethical issues consistently align with progressive concerns, not traditional moral questions. The third element, reasoning and decision-making. Students learn to
reason and make ethical decisions by drawing on different bases for ethical judgments, ethical principles and traditions, values and moral commitments.
The curriculum states students should understand
different ethical traditions and how these understandings can inform ethical decision-making.
In practice, this means students learn about utilitarian ethics, greatest good for greatest number, used to justify egalitarian policies. Rights-based ethics, human rights framework, used to justify expanding rights claims. Care ethics, emphasis on relationships and care. Feminist, ethical framework. Virtue ethics, somewhat, though stripped of traditional virtues. What's minimized or presented as problematic. Religious ethical frameworks, particularly Judeo-Christian ethics. Traditional moral frameworks emphasizing duty, honor, self-discipline. Ethical frameworks prioritizing individual responsibility over collective action. The fourth element, understanding different perspectives. Students learn that.
Ethical positions may come from different perspectives.
And
consider how different worldviews influence ethical positions and the importance of being able to justify personal decisions and actions.
this sounds like teaching students to understand diverse ethical viewpoints. But in practice, students learn that ethical disagreements come from different perspectives or worldviews, not from differences in reasoning about objective moral truth. This is ethical relativism. Different cultures or groups have different ethics, and who's to say which is right? The curriculum emphasizes that students should acknowledge and appreciate the views of others on ethical matters, examine and justify the basis for their ethical positions, reflect on their ethical positions, considering the opinions of others and personal experiences. Notice, students should acknowledge and appreciate others' views, reflect on their positions, considering others' opinions. The message is that your initial ethical views, probably shaped by your family and culture, should be questioned and adjusted based on other perspectives you encounter. For students from traditional or religious families, this means their family's ethics are one perspective that should be balanced against other perspectives they learn in school. Perspectives emphasizing environmental ethics, social justice, inclusion, rights expansion. How this plays out across subjects. In English, students examine
ethical issues and dilemmas represented in texts,
and explore
how authors use text to influence audiences' ethical understanding.
They analyze characters' ethical decisions, but through curriculum's ethical frameworks, examining whether characters uphold justice, equality, care, respect for difference. In Haas, ethical understanding is pervasive. Students examine
ethical concepts relevant to national and global citizenship, what makes someone a good global citizen, emphasis on responsibility for others, environmental care, cultural respect, rights and responsibilities in democratic societies, emphasis on rights, less on responsibilities, ethical issues related to economic systems, capitalism's ethics are questioned, inequality emphasized. Ethical dimensions of environmental issues, strong emphasis on environmental ethics.
in science. Students consider
Ethical implications of scientific developments and technologies.
and examine
Responsibilities scientists have in considering the ethical dimensions of their work.
This sounds reasonable. Ethics of genetic engineering, AI, etc. But notice the emphasis. Science and technology are presented as ethically problematic. Environmental damage, inequality, risks. The ethical framework consistently emphasizes precaution, environmental concern, social impact, rarely economic benefit, human flourishing through technology, or innovation's moral value. In health and physical education, students explore
Ethical issues related to health and well-being.
including
Rights and responsibilities in relationships. Respectful relationships framework, consent, LGBTIQ plus inclusion. ethical dimensions of health choices, personal health choices presented as having social and environmental dimensions.
The cumulative effect. After 11 years of ethical understanding embedded across subjects, what have students learned? They've learned ethics is about perspectives, not objective truth. The key ethical issues are environment, social justice, rights, diversity. Traditional moral frameworks, particularly religious ones, are one perspective among many. Individual choices should be evaluated based on their collective/social/environmental impacts. Being ethical means being inclusive, sustainable, and committed to equality. They haven't learned that there might be objective moral truths, that virtue, character, and personal responsibility are central ethical concerns, that religious ethical frameworks might offer wisdom, that individual liberty and personal flourishing are moral goods. That disagreement about ethics might involve more than different perspectives. This isn't teaching ethics. This is teaching a specific progressive ethical framework while presenting it as neutral ethical reasoning. Part 7. General capability. Number 3. Intercultural understanding. The third capability is intercultural understanding. And this is where cultural relativism becomes explicit. The rationale states,
Intercultural understanding aims to help students learn to value their own cultures and beliefs and those of others.
sounds reasonable. Appreciate your own culture and respect others. But then it continues.
Students develop intercultural understanding as they learn to appreciate and engage with diverse cultures in ways that recognize commonalities and differences, create connections, and cultivate respect between people.
Notice the assumption. The purpose is creating connections and respect between different cultures, understood as separate and distinct, not integrating diverse people into a shared Australian culture. Intercultural understanding is organised around 3 elements. 1. Recognising culture and identity. Students learn that.
Culture shapes personal and group identity.
And that.
People have multiple cultural identities that shift in different contexts.
The curriculum emphasises that students should
Identify and describe the various groups to which they belong and how these contribute to their sense of identity. Identify the cultural groups to which they belong and understand how their membership shapes their identity. Identify how people define themselves in relation to cultural groups.
Notice the emphasis. You are defined primarily by your cultural group membership. Your identity is fundamentally about which groups you belong to. This is identity politics embedded in curriculum. Students aren't taught that they're individuals first, Australians sharing common civic identity. They're taught that they're members of cultural groups first, with identities shaped by those group memberships. The curriculum states students should
Explore the diverse range of cultural groups in Australia and examine commonalities and differences within and between these groups.
The focus is on diversity and difference, not on Australian identity as something shared across diverse backgrounds. The second of the 3 elements is interacting and empathising with others. Students learn to
Develop empathy for others and appreciate different perspectives.
and
Consider and develop multiple perspectives.
they must.
Imagine the feelings and motivations of characters and people and consequences for them in particular situations.
The curriculum emphasises perspective taking, seeing situations from others' cultural viewpoints. Now, empathy is valuable. Understanding others' perspectives can be important. But notice what this does when combined with cultural relativism. Cultural relativism is if different cultural groups have fundamentally different perspectives shaped by their cultures, and students should empathise with and validate those perspectives, then there's no shared standard for evaluating whose perspective is more accurate or justified. Everyone's cultural perspective is valid from within their cultural framework. This makes resolving disagreements between different cultural groups almost impossible. How do you adjudicate between conflicting cultural values if all cultural perspectives are equally valid? The third element is reflecting on intercultural experiences. Students
Develop the ability to reflect on intercultural experiences, including by identifying consequences of misunderstandings and stereotyping.
they must
Identify and challenge stereotypes and prejudices in the representation of cultural groups.
The curriculum states students should
Identify racism and other forms of discrimination and their effects on individuals and groups.
Now, identifying and challenging stereotypes and discrimination is appropriate. But notice the emphasis. Students are trained to look for and identify discrimination, prejudice, racism, and whose perspectives are typically identified as stereotyping or prejudiced. Traditional Australian cultural perspectives that might be critical of other cultural practices. It's majority culture assumptions that minority groups find problematic. Students aren't equally trained to identify stereotypes about Australian culture or prejudices against traditional values. The identifying of racism and discrimination flows in one direction. How this plays out. In English, students read texts from diverse cultures, analyse how different cultures are represented, examine stereotypes in texts, explore how texts reflect cultural perspectives. Literature selection is driven by need for cultural diversity. Classic British or Australian literature is balanced or outweighed by literature from various cultural backgrounds. Students analyse texts for cultural representation. Are Aboriginal people accurately represented? Are Asian Australians stereotyped? Are diverse voices centred? In HASS, this capability is pervasive. Students learn about
Diverse cultural groups in Australia, past and present.
with emphasis on Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultures, migrant cultures, Asian cultures, and religious and ethnic diversity. The framework is consistently, Australia is culturally diverse. This diversity should be celebrated, and different cultural perspectives should be respected. Students examine
How cultural identity is shaped by place and culture. Should cultural diversity in Australia and connections between Australia and other countries. Cultural perspectives on historical events and issues. Rights and responsibilities in multicultural Australia.
the emphasis is on difference, diversity, separate cultural identities, not shared Australian identity. In languages, obviously relevant here. Students learning languages are taught about those cultures with emphasis on respect, appreciation, understanding cultural protocols. In health and physical education, students explore
Cultural perspectives on health and well-being.
and learn about.
Diversity in families and relationships.
The message is that different cultural groups have different understandings of health, family structures, relationships, and all should be respected as valid within their cultural contexts. The core problem. Intercultural understanding sounds positive. Respect diverse cultures, reduce prejudice, and appreciate difference. But the underlying framework is cultural relativism. Different cultures have different values, practices, perspectives, and these are equally valid within their cultural contexts. No culture can judge another, because all judgments come from cultural perspectives. This creates several problems. 1. It undermines shared Australian identity. If everyone is primarily a member of their cultural group, with identity shaped by that group membership, then what binds Australians together? Not shared culture. That's denied. Not shared values. Those are culturally relative. Just geography. 2. It makes cultural practices beyond criticism. If cultural practices are valid within their cultural context, then practices that clash with Australian values, gender inequality, arranged marriages, corporal punishment of children, homophobia, can't be criticised without being culturally insensitive. 3. It privileges group identity over individual identity. Students learn they are primarily members of cultural groups, not primarily individuals with their own values and choices who happen to have particular backgrounds. 4. It's one-directional in practice. Respect for diverse cultures in practice means respect for minority cultures and criticism of majority, traditional Australian culture. Students are taught to identify stereotypes and prejudices in how Anglo-Australian culture views others, not in how other cultures view Anglo-Australians or each other. Real intercultural understanding would involve teaching about diverse cultures factually and respectfully. Also teaching about shared Australian identity and values that transcend cultural background. Enabling students to evaluate cultural practices using universal moral principles. recognising that individuals aren't simply products of their cultural groups. The Australian curriculum version creates cultural relativism, fragments Australian identity, and prioritises group identity over individual identity. Part 8. General capability number 4. Personal and social capability. The fourth and final capability we'll examine is personal and social capability. This capability is about developing students.
Self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, and social management.
The rationale states,
Personal and social capability supports students in becoming creative and confident individuals who, as stated in the Alice Springs Imparentwe Education Declaration, have a sense of self-worth, self-awareness, and personal identity that enables them to manage their emotional, mental, spiritual, and physical well-being, with a sense of optimism about their lives and the future.
now helping students develop self-awareness, manage emotions, and build social skills sounds valuable. These are important life skills, but look carefully at what's included and how it's framed. Personal and social capability is organised around 4 elements. Permise self-awareness. Students develop
Understanding of themselves as individuals and as members of communities.
They learn to
Recognize their personal qualities, strengths, and abilities, and understand how these contribute to positive self-identities. Understand the influences on their sense of self and identity, including how they see themselves and are seen by others. Recognize emotions they experience and how these affect their thoughts and behaviours.
This emphasis on self-awareness, recognising emotions, and understanding identity is part of social emotional learning, SEL, that's become pervasive in education. The curriculum states students should
Identify and describe personal interests, skills, strengths, achievements, and challenges, and identify personal values and examine how they are shaped.
Notice, students are prompted to examine how their values are shaped, implying values come from somewhere and can change. For students from traditional or religious families, this means their family's values are presented as shaped by that background and should be examined and potentially adjusted. The second element is self-management. Students learn to
Manage their emotions, behaviours, and learning to achieve goals and aspirations.
They must develop capacity to
Adapt to change and transition by being flexible and employing persistence and resilience. Set personal goals and plan courses of action to achieve these goals. Make decisions, problem solve, and manage their time. Identify and articulate their needs and seek help from others to meet their needs.
The emphasis on resilience, goal setting, and help seeking is standard SEL content. But notice how managing emotions and seeking help are framed. Students should identify when they're experiencing difficult emotions and seek support from counsellors, teachers, trusted adults. This positions schools, and particularly counselling staff, as primary sources of emotional support, potentially displacing parents. Students are taught that schools are where you bring your emotional needs, not necessarily home. The curriculum also emphasises managing online interactions and understanding digital well-being, which sounds reasonable, but in practice often means schools monitoring students' online activity and social media use, teaching them about online safety in ways that position online interaction as risky. The third element is social awareness. Students develop
Understanding of the feelings, needs, and perspectives of others, and how to relate effectively with others in different contexts.
They learn to
Appreciate the perspectives and feelings of others. Understand relationships and identify changing influences on these relationships. Recognize how social, cultural, and environmental factors influence the well-being of themselves and others.
the emphasis on appreciating others' perspectives and recognising social factors influencing well-being connects to the curriculum's broader frameworks. Students learn that well-being isn't just individual, but is shaped by social, cultural, and environmental factors, meaning individual problems might actually be systemic problems requiring social change. If you're stressed, it might not just be that you need better coping strategies. It might be that society's structures are causing stress and need to change. This is therapeutic language serving political ends. How this plays out. In health and physical education, this capability is most extensive here. Students learn about identity and emotions, understanding identity, managing emotions, interacting with others, forming friendships, managing relationships, making healthy and safe choices, decision-making about health, safety, risk. The curriculum explicitly includes respectful relationships, content covering, recognizing and responding to inappropriate or unsafe behaviors, understanding consent, taught from early ages in age-appropriate ways, diversity in families and relationships, normalizing diverse family structures, gender and identity, exploring gender as distinct from sex, respecting diverse gender identities. This is where gender ideology enters through personal and social capability. Students learn about gender identity, gender expression, and diversity of identities as part of developing social awareness and learning to respect others. In English, students develop personal and social capability through
reflecting on their own responses to texts and considering others' responses, creating texts that explore personal and social issues, considering how texts represent diverse perspectives and experiences.
Literature is used as vehicle for exploring social issues and developing empathy for diverse experiences. In HASS, students use this capability when
examining different perspectives on historical events, understanding how individuals and groups have worked for change, exploring rights and responsibilities in communities.
The emphasis is on students seeing themselves as potential agents of social change who can work collectively for causes they believe in, causes shaped by curriculum's values. The underlying concerns. Personal and social capability sounds entirely positive, helping students develop self-awareness, manage emotions, build relationships, work with others. But several concerns emerge. 1. Schools as primary source of emotional support. Students are taught to bring emotional needs and personal issues to school staff, rather than primarily to family. This positions schools as equal or primary caregivers, potentially displacing parental authority and intimacy. 2. Therapeutic culture in education. The constant emphasis on emotions, well-being, identity creates therapeutic culture in schools. Students learn to see themselves as emotionally vulnerable, to identify when they need support, to seek help for emotional struggles. This can be valuable for genuinely struggling students, but it also creates culture where students are encouraged to see themselves as fragile, where emotional responses become primary, where resilience means seeking support rather than developing toughness. 3. Social emotional learning as vehicle for ideology. SEL content is vehicle for teaching curriculum's values. Social awareness means awareness of inequality, discrimination, environmental problems. Social management means working collectively for social change. Personal identity is explored in ways that prompt students to question family values and adopt curriculum's values. 4. Gender ideology through diversity in relationships. Teaching about diverse families and relationships and gender and identity normalizes whatever family structures and gender concepts the curriculum presents, which includes gender spectrum ideology, fluid sexuality, non-traditional family structures. As equal options, students should respect without judgment. For families with traditional values about gender and family, this directly conflicts with what parents are teaching at home. Part 9. What it means for parents. So we've walked through the 3 cross-curriculum priorities and 4 key general capabilities that shape the Australian curriculum version 9.0. If you're a parent in Queensland, South Australia, Tasmania, Northern Territory, or the Australian Capital Territory, and your children are in schools following this curriculum, what does all this mean for you? Let me give you some practical implications and red flags to watch for. 1. Your children are receiving comprehensive ideological formation. This isn't education in the traditional sense, transmitting knowledge, teaching skills, building understanding. This is formation, shaping what students believe, value, and how they see the world. The curriculum's priorities and capabilities aren't add-ons. They're woven throughout everything your children learn from foundation through year 10. 11 years of systematic ideological embedding. By design, students can't escape it. It's in mathematics and science, not just history and English. It's in arts and physical education. It shapes assessments and how teachers approach every subject. What to watch for. How your children talk about Australian history. Do they see it primarily as colonial oppression? How they view Western civilization. Do they see it as fundamentally problematic? How they approach environmental issues. Do they express anxiety about climate catastrophe? How they understand identity. Do they see themselves primarily as members of groups rather than as individuals? What they believe about knowledge itself. Do they think truth is relative to perspective? The second red flag, traditional knowledge and values, are being systematically questioned. If your family holds traditional values about history, culture, family structure, gender, religion, economics, the curriculum is systematically challenging those values. Not through open debate, not by presenting alternative views and letting students decide, but by embedding progressive perspectives as the framework through which all subjects are understood. Your children aren't being taught.
Here are different views on Australian history. Evaluate them and decide what you think.
They're being taught.
Australian history is colonial history. Aboriginal perspectives are central. Multiple perspectives show there's no single true account.
They're not being taught.
Here are different ethical frameworks, including religious ethics. Evaluate them.
They're being taught.
Ethics is about perspectives. Key ethical issues are environment, social justice, and rights. Your family's religious ethics are one perspective that should be balanced against others.
What to watch for. Your children dismissing or criticizing family values as old-fashioned or biased. Your children questioning religious or traditional moral teaching. Your children expressing shame about being Australian or Western. Your children adopting progressive views on gender, sexuality, environment, inequality, not through reasoning, but through absorption. The third red flag. Critical thinking is training in progressive critique. When your children are taught critical thinking, they're not learning neutral tools for evaluating any argument. They're learning to critique traditional knowledge, dominant narratives, and existing systems from a progressive perspective. They're taught to question whether historical accounts are biased, meaning, do they reflect dominant perspectives that should be challenged? Whether current systems are sustainable, meaning, are they environmentally and socially just? Whether cultural practices are inclusive, meaning, do they accommodate all identities and perspectives? But they're not taught to question whether Aboriginal ways of knowing are actually equivalent to scientific method, whether sustainability frameworks are economically realistic, whether viewing everything through identity and power is reductive, whether the curriculum itself reflects ideological biases. What to watch for. Your children using critical thinking to tear down rather than build up. Your children good at critiquing traditional views, but unable to defend them. Your children seeing bias in everything except progressive perspectives. Your children confusing cynicism with sophistication. The fourth red flag. Schools may position themselves as primary moral authority. Through ethical understanding and personal and social capability, schools are teaching values, shaping ethical reasoning, and positioning themselves as sources of emotional and moral support. When conflicts arise between school-taught values and family values, schools may present their values as more enlightened, more informed, more ethical. Students are taught to bring emotional needs, identity questions, and ethical dilemmas to school staff. This can displace parental authority and intimacy. What to watch for. Your children going to school counsellors rather than to you with personal issues. Your children citing teachers as authorities on ethical questions rather than parents. Your children treating school as source of truth on controversial moral issues. School staff suggesting your values are harmful or unsupportive. The fifth red flag. Your children may be trained as activists. The sustainability priority explicitly aims to
Empower students as change agents.
Who can?
Initiate and lead change.
Ethical understanding teaches students to identify ethical issues, defined by curriculum's priorities. Critical thinking teaches students to imagine alternative futures and critique current systems. Personal and social capability teaches students to work collectively to address social issues. These combine to train students as activists for progressive causes. What to watch for? Your children expressing anxiety about environmental catastrophe. Your children wanting to participate in climate protests or activism. Your children criticizing your family's lifestyle as unsustainable. Your children seeing activism as higher calling than academic achievement or career preparation. The sixth red flag: assessment requires demonstrating approved perspectives. Students are assessed not just on knowledge, but on whether they demonstrate the curriculum's values and perspectives. To get good marks in English, students must analyse texts through approved lenses, power relationships, cultural perspectives, representation. To do well in HASS, students must demonstrate understanding of Aboriginal perspectives as central, must frame Australian history through colonisation, must analyse systems through sustainability and equity. To succeed in any subject, students must demonstrate the capabilities, must show critical thinking of the progressive sort, ethical understanding using curriculum's ethics, intercultural understanding, celebrating diversity and difference. What to watch for? Your children expressing views they don't believe to get good grades. Your children learning to write what teachers want rather than what they think. Your children becoming cynical about education. Just tell them what they want to hear. Your children's work being marked down for expressing traditional or conservative views. The seventh red flag: alternative perspectives are marginalised or pathologized. Traditional perspectives, conservative viewpoints, religious frameworks, these are either absent from curriculum or presented as problematic. Patriotism becomes nationalism. Traditional family structures become heteronormative. Religious ethics become one perspective shaped by cultural background. Capitalism becomes unsustainable system causing inequality. Western civilization becomes colonialism and oppression. Students from families holding these views learn that their families are behind the times, biased or harmful. What to watch for? Your children embarrassed by families' views. Your children reluctant to express family perspectives at school. Your children treating families' traditional values as shameful secrets. Your children distancing themselves from family's culture or religion. So, what can parents do? 1. Stay informed. Read the curriculum documents yourself. Ask your children what they're learning. Look at their work. Attend parent-teacher meetings and ask questions. Don't just trust that schools are providing neutral education. Verify. 2. Counter-educate at home. This is crucial. Your children are receiving ideological formation at school. You need to provide alternative formation at home. Teach them Australian history more completely, both achievements and failures, both progress and injustices. Don't let curriculum's one-sided narrative be the only one they hear. Teach them to think critically about what they're taught in school. Ask them, what did your teacher say about this? What do you think? What does the evidence show? Are there other perspectives? Teach them your family's values explicitly. Don't assume they're absorbing them through osmosis. The curriculum is explicitly teaching its values. You need to explicitly teach yours. Teach them that objective truth exists, that moral principles transcend cultural perspectives, that knowledge isn't just power, but genuine understanding of reality. 3. Build alternative educational experiences. Find or create opportunities for your children to learn outside the curriculum's framework. This is where McClelland Academy comes in. We've built resources specifically to provide what the curriculum lacks, and genuine Australian stories that can flip a narrative on its agenda-driven head. Our programs supplement what students are missing in school with what they need. Knowledge for its own sake, appreciation for Western achievements, alongside honest acknowledgement of failures, understanding of how great Australia is, development of character and virtue, and preparation for genuine intellectual life. Whether your children are learning through McClelland Academy's full programs or using our resources to supplement school, you're giving them access to an educational tradition that the Australian curriculum has largely abandoned. 4. Consider your options. For some families, staying in the system while counter-educating at home is workable. For others, the ideological saturation is too comprehensive and alternative education becomes necessary. Options include moving to a private school with more traditional approach. Research carefully. Many private schools follow same curriculum. Homeschooling, legal in all Australian states with proper registration. Looking into classical Christian schools or other alternative schools. Supplementing extensively with programs like McClelland Academy while staying in school. There's no single right answer for every family. But doing nothing while hoping for the best is not viable once you understand what's being taught. 5. Connect with other parents. You're not alone. Thousands of parents across Queensland, South Australia, Tasmania, Northern Territory, and ACT are waking up to what's in this curriculum. Find other concerned parents, share information, support each other, consider collective action through school councils or parent groups. Sometimes just knowing other families share your concerns provides strength to push back or make difficult decisions about alternatives. 6. Prepare your children for cognitive dissonance. Your children are going to experience conflict between what they learn at school and what they learn at home. Prepare them for this. Teach them that it's normal to encounter different perspectives, that schools sometimes teach things families disagree with, that they need to think carefully about what they're told rather than just accepting it. Help them develop resilience to social pressure and intellectual confidence to question approved narratives. Teach them that getting good grades sometimes means demonstrating understanding of perspectives you don't personally hold. That's a skill called intellectual flexibility that's actually valuable. But make sure they know the difference between demonstrating understanding and actually believing. 7. Advocate for your rights as parents. You have rights regarding your children's education. In most contexts, you can request to see curriculum materials and lesson plans. Opt out of certain content, particularly sexuality education. Request advance notice of sensitive content. Provide feedback to schools. Participate in school councils. Use these rights. Don't be intimidated by being told, this is the mandated curriculum. The curriculum mandates certain content, but how it's taught, what emphasis is placed where, what supplementary materials are used. These involve choices where parent input is legitimate. So what resources are available to you? McClelland Academy offers comprehensive resources designed to fill the gaps in the Australian curriculum. These resources work whether you're homeschooling, supplementing school education, or considering educational alternatives. We are building what the Australian curriculum has systemically destroyed: critical thinking, positive Australian stories and hero stories, the real history of Australia, culture transmitted with appreciation, alongside criticism, and values grounded in something deeper than current political fashions, climate realism courses, and a wide range of developing unique courses. You can also watch years of classical education conferences, teaching Western civilization with appropriate context, both achievements and failures, but without the relentless focus on oppression and guilt. There are years of interesting talks from teachers, professors, principals, educators, parents, and students. Have a browse through the various talks and find one to watch. The pursuit of truth is our only goal. Visit McClellandacademy.com to explore our developing list of watchable resources and find support for providing your children the education they deserve. Closing. We've covered a lot in this analysis. Let me bring it all together. The Australian Curriculum version 9.0 taught in Queensland, South Australia, Tasmania, Northern Territory, and ACT is not neutral education. It's systematic ideological formation embedded in every subject your children study. Through 3 cross-curriculum priorities: Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander histories and cultures, Asia and Australia's engagement with Asia, and sustainability. Students learn to view Australian history primarily through colonisation, to see Australia as part of Asia rather than the West, and to approach every subject through environmental crisis framing. Through general capabilities, particularly critical and creative thinking, ethical understanding, intercultural understanding, and personal and social capability, students learn to think in particular ways, adopt particular values, understand identity in particular terms, and see themselves as potential activists for progressive causes. This isn't incidental. This isn't accidental. This is by design. The curriculum openly states its purpose is to shape students' values and worldviews, to empower them as change agents, to help them envision alternative futures. That's not education. That's indoctrination. Now, some people hearing this analysis will say,
You're exaggerating. It's not that bad. Schools are just teaching kids to think critically and be good citizens.
To those people I say, read the curriculum documents yourself. They're publicly available. Look at what your children are bringing home. Ask them what they're learning. Then tell me I'm exaggerating. Others will say,
You're being political. You just don't like progressive values.
I say, parents have the right to know what their children are being taught with their tax dollars. Whether you personally agree with the curriculum's values or not, you should be informed about them. And you should recognize that presenting one set of values as neutral education while marginalizing alternatives is itself a political act. And some will say,
What's the alternative? We need a curriculum. It has to contain something.
I say, the alternative is education that transmits knowledge objectively, teaches skills genuinely, builds cultural literacy across perspectives, develops real critical thinking applicable to any argument, explores ethics seriously, including traditional frameworks, and prepares students for citizenship without indoctrinating them in particular political positions. That's possible. That's what education used to be. That's what it should be again. But until that happens, until curriculum authorities are reformed or replaced, until teacher training is depoliticized, until schools return to their core mission of education rather than formation, parents have to act. You have to stay informed. You have to counter-educate. You have to provide alternatives where necessary. You have to connect with other parents. You have to use the resources available to fill the gaps. Organizations like McClelland Academy exist because parents recognize that what schools are providing isn't enough or isn't right, and created alternatives. The curriculum is comprehensive and embedded, but it's not inescapable. Your children can receive genuine education if you're willing to ensure they get it. Whether by supplementing what schools provide, seeking alternative schools, or building educational experiences outside the system. Your children are depending on you. They're not equipped to recognize that they're being programmed with an ideological perspective. They trust that what they're taught in school is true and right and good. You need to provide them with the knowledge, the skills, the critical thinking tools, and the moral framework to evaluate what they're taught rather than simply absorbing it. This is not easy. It requires time, energy, resources, and courage. It's easier to trust the system. It's easier to assume schools have your children's best interests at heart. It's easier to not make waves. But this curriculum makes clear the system is not neutral. The system has priorities, and those priorities are ideological. The system is forming your children in particular ways, teaching them particular values, shaping how they see the world. The question is, are you okay with that? If you are, if you share the curriculum's progressive values and want your children formed in those values, then the system is working for you. But if you're not, if you hold traditional values, if you want your children to receive education rather than indoctrination, if you believe objective truth exists and cultural transmission matters, then you need to act. The Australian curriculum version 9.0 is not serving your family's interests and hoping it will get better, or assuming it's not as bad as it sounds, or thinking your children will naturally absorb your values despite school's influence. That's not a strategy. You need a plan. You need resources. You need support. That's available, but you have to seek it out. Thank you for listening to this comprehensive analysis. I know it's long. I know it's detailed, but you deserve to know exactly what's in this curriculum, not just vague complaints about woke education. Now you know. Now you can act. Your children are worth it. Their education is too important to leave to a system that's been ideologically captured. Go to McClellandacademy.com for resources that provide genuine education grounded in knowledge, truth, and excellence. Connect with other parents, read the curriculum yourself, watch what your children are learning, and make decisions that serve your family's values and your children's genuine educational needs. The future belongs to our children. Let's ensure they receive the education they deserve, not the indoctrination a captured system provides.